Zefkari floated inside the crystal ship high above the blue planet called Earth and watched the humans below with cold interest. The Ethereal Collective had sent observers to study this violent species for 3 cycles now, and the results were always the same. These creatures fought each other constantly over land and resources and ideas that made no sense to advanced minds. Wars burned across 7 continents, while the humans poisoned their own air and water without care for tomorrow. The observation vessel hung invisible in space using technology the humans could never dream of creating. Zefkari recorded everything through sensors that could count individual heartbeats on the planet's surface below. Every murder and theft and act of cruelty went into the files that would decide humanity's fate when the Collective Council met to vote on their future. Down in the dark void between planets, a human ship limped through space on failing engines. The vessel, called Defiance, carried the scars of recent battle like badges of honor across its metal hull. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched his crew work to keep their dying ship alive for just a few more hours. They had fought in the Martian mining wars for 8 months straight and lost more friends than any crew should lose. Communications Officer Lisa Carter sat at her station monitoring distress calls from colonies throughout the system. Her fingers moved across controls worn smooth by countless hours of use as desperate voices begged for help that would never come. The Earth Defense Force had only 12 ships left in this sector, and all of them were damaged beyond safe operation. Jake Morrison had led men and women through battles that would give nightmares to civilians, but he had never seen his crew look so tired. They moved like people walking through deep water with weights tied to their feet. Engineer Ryan Phillips worked in the engine room where temperatures rose above what human bodies should endure, but he stayed at his post because someone had to keep the reactor stable. Medic Amy Watson treated wounded crew members in the medical bay that had run out of proper supplies weeks ago. She used torn fabric for bandages and recycled painkillers that were supposed to be thrown away after their expiration dates. The wounded soldiers never complained because they knew she was doing everything possible with nothing to work with. Zefkari studied these humans and saw exactly what the Collective expected to find. They built ships for war instead of exploration and filled them with weapons instead of scientific equipment. Their first instinct when meeting other humans was to fight over who controlled what territory. Even their entertainment focused on violence and conflict and the worship of warriors. The alien observer made careful notes about human emotional responses during crisis situations. Fear dominated their thoughts when facing unknown dangers, while anger drove their reactions to threats against their territory. They seemed incapable of the logical thinking that marked truly civilized species across the galaxy. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan manned the weapons station aboard the Defiance, even though their guns had barely enough power to shoot down asteroids. She kept running diagnostics on systems that everyone knew were broken beyond repair, because maintaining routine helped the crew stay focused on something other than their approaching deaths. Navigator Helen Davis plotted courses through space that avoided known patrol routes of the enemy fleets that still hunted human survivors. Her calculations had to account for their damaged engines and limited fuel supplies while finding safe harbors that might not exist anymore. Every jump through hyperspace might be their last one if the engines finally gave up completely. Zefkari watched these humans struggle to survive and saw primitive creatures driven by base instincts. Their ship was a weapon of war crewed by soldiers whose only skills involved finding better ways to kill their enemies. The medical officer had trained to treat battle wounds instead of diseases, and the engineer knew more about explosive yields than peaceful energy production. Chief Engineer Ben Cooper crawled through maintenance tunnels that were never meant for human bodies while radiation from damaged systems slowly poisoned his blood. He ignored the dosimeter readings that told him to evacuate the engine compartments because someone had to repair the quantum stabilizers before they exploded and took the whole ship with them. The Ethereal Collective had classified thousands of species over millions of years, and humans fit perfectly into Category 4, violent and unpredictable and ultimately disposable creatures who would destroy themselves long before they could threaten more advanced civilizations. The recommendation would be simple containment protocols or perhaps sterilization if the threat assessment proved too dangerous. These observations would join the files of other failed species that had shown promise in their early development before falling into the same patterns of self-destruction. Zefkari felt no emotion while recording humanity's failures, because emotion was a primitive response that enlightened beings had evolved beyond. The human ship, Defiance, continued its slow journey through empty space while its crew fought to keep their metal coffin operational for another day. They were perfect examples of everything wrong with their species, and Zefkari recorded every detail of their violent nature for the final report that would seal humanity's doom. The detection arrays aboard the Defiance screamed warnings that made every crew member jump from their stations. Something massive was approaching from the outer rim of the solar system, and it was not human technology. Captain Jake Morrison ordered all engines to stop as his tactical officer. Kate Sullivan tried to identify the unknown contact on her failing sensors. The object was huge beyond anything humans had ever built, and it moved through space without any visible engines or exhaust trails. Long-range scanners showed a crystalline structure that seemed to bend light around itself, like liquid starlight flowing over transparent walls. No human ship had ever seen anything like it in 300 years of space travel. Zefkari decided the time had come for direct contact with these primitive specimens. The ethereal vessel dropped its cloaking systems and appeared before the human ship like a small moon made of living crystal. Energy patterns flowed through its translucent hull in colors that human eyes could barely process without pain. Communications. Officer Lisa Carter watched her instruments go wild as alien signals flooded every frequency they monitored. The translation programs that worked perfectly for human languages crashed and restarted over and over again. While trying to decode something completely beyond their programming capabilities, the first alien voice in human history spoke through their communication system with words that seemed to bypass their ears and formed directly inside their minds. Every crew member on the Defiance heard the same message in their native language, regardless of where they were born or what dialect they grew up speaking. Prepare for evaluation. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan's hand moved toward the weapons controls. Because standing orders required hostile action against any unknown contact that refused to identify itself. Her fingers hovered over the firing button while she waited for Captain Morrison to give the order that would start humanity's first interstellar war. Jake. Morrison raised his hand to stop her from shooting and opened communications channels instead of weapon systems. He spoke into the microphone with steady voice, despite knowing that his words might be the first ones that represented his entire species to the galaxy beyond their solar system. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force Vessel Defiance. We are humans from the planet Earth, and we mean no harm to you or your people. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The alien vessel was beautiful in ways that human language could not describe properly. Its crystalline hull reflected the light from distant stars, while internal energy patterns pulsed like the heartbeat of some massive living creature. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly formed and dissolved in continuous cycles along its surface. Zefkari activated the translation matrix and began explaining the purpose of the ethereal collective to these primitive beings. The observer described how advanced civilizations monitored younger species to determine their fitness for membership in the galactic community. Some species passed the evaluation and joined the greater universe, while others failed and faced containment or elimination. Chief Engineer Ryan Phillips worked frantically to keep their damaged systems online while alien scanning beams penetrated every part of their ship. The energy readings were off every scale they had, and the quantum resonance patterns made no sense according to human physics. Whatever technology powered that crystal ship was millions of years beyond anything Earth could produce. Navigator Helen Davis plotted escape routes, even though everyone knew their damaged engines could never outrun something that could appear and disappear at will. She calculated hyperspace jumps to nowhere. Because having a plan felt better than accepting they were completely helpless against superior technology, The alien scanner beams felt like cold fingers searching through every compartment of the ship and every thought inside every human head. Zefkari examined their primitive brains and saw electrical patterns, driven by chemical reactions instead of the pure energy consciousness that marked truly advanced beings. Medic Amy Watson prepared emergency medical supplies because first contact protocols assumed alien pathogens might be transmitted through unknown vectors. She had no idea what to do if their visitors decided to board the ship, but training required preparation for every possible scenario. No matter how unlikely success might be, Jake Morrison asked questions about the galactic community and what evaluation criteria would determine humanity's fate. He spoke with diplomatic courtesy despite knowing his damaged warship made a poor impression on beings who traveled between stars as easily as humans walked between rooms. Zefkari observed how these humans responded to first contact with curiosity instead of immediate violence. Their leader chose words over weapons even when facing unknown aliens with technology that could destroy their ship without effort. This behavior contradicted the observers' expectations based on previous surveillance data. The crew of the Defiance worked at their stations with professional competence despite facing the most important moment in human history. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan kept weapons ready but did not fire without orders while communications. Officer Lisa Carter maintained open channels and recorded everything for transmission back to Earth. Engineer Ryan Phillips monitored their reactor output and structural integrity while alien sensors examined every rivet and weld in their hull. The scans revealed construction techniques and metallurgy that must seem laughably primitive to beings who could build ships from living crystal and focused energy. Ben Cooper crawled through maintenance tunnels, making repairs to systems that alien technology could probably fix instantly with techniques humans might never understand. His radiation exposure climbed higher with every minute spent near the damaged reactor, but someone had to keep the ship from exploding during first contact. Helen Davis calculated their position relative to Earth and wondered if this meeting would be remembered as the day humanity joined the stars or the day they learned they were alone in a hostile universe. The alien ship could have destroyed them already if that was their intention, so perhaps evaluation meant they still had a chance. Zefkari compiled initial observations about human behavior under extreme stress. They showed remarkable discipline and organization for such a primitive species, while their leader demonstrated strategic thinking beyond what previous surveillance suggested was possible. These creatures might prove more interesting than the standard Category 4 classification indicated. Warning alarms shattered the tense quiet of first contact as both ships detected something far worse emerging from the dark space beyond the outer planets. Long-range sensors showed massive objects dropping out of hyperspace in formations that could only mean one thing to any species that knew galactic history. The devourers had returned. Zefkari's crystalline form flickered with patterns that would have looked like panic to any being capable of recognizing fear in energy-based life forms. The ethereal collective had believed these ancient enemies were extinct for over 10 million years after the Great Purge that left entire star systems as empty graveyards. Captain Jake Morrison studied the tactical display showing hundreds of contacts appearing across the system in perfect attack formations. Each enemy vessel registered larger than anything in the human fleet combined, and their energy signatures made the alien ship beside them look like a child's toy in comparison. The devourer ships looked like metal tumors grown in the dark spaces between galaxies. Organic curves blended with mechanical angles and designs that hurt human eyes to examine, but bioluminescent strips pulsed along their hulls like infected veins carrying poison through dying flesh. These creatures had consumed civilizations when Earth was still a ball of molten rock and primitive atmosphere. They traveled from galaxy to galaxy like a plague that left nothing alive behind them, except empty worlds stripped of every atom that could sustain life. Communications Officer Lisa Carter intercepted transmissions between the enemy vessels in frequencies that made her equipment spark and smoke. The translation programs recognized some words from ancient languages that predated human civilization, but the meaning was always the same: Hunger and consumption and the joy of ending life wherever it tried to flourish. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan counted enemy contacts until her instruments ran out of numbers to display. Over 3,000 devourer ships had entered the system, and more were arriving every minute through jump points that tore holes in normal spacetime like wounds in reality itself. Jake Morrison made a decision that shocked the alien observer floating beside his bridge. Instead of running toward Earth or trying to hide behind the alien vessel's superior technology, he opened communications on every human frequency and began transmitting a message that would change everything. All human vessels, this is Captain Jake Morrison aboard the Defiance. We have contact with hostile alien forces of unknown origin and capability. I am transmitting all tactical data to every ship in the system. All vessels converge on my position immediately. We make our stand here and now. Engineer Ryan Phillips rerouted every available amp of power from life support systems to weapons and shields while the ship's hull groaned under stress loads it was never designed to handle. He worked with steady hands despite knowing their guns could barely scratch the armor of vessels that had destroyed entire star fleets. Navigator Helen Davis plotted intercept courses for every human ship within communication range and watched her displays fill with incoming contacts. Mining vessels and patrol boats and even civilian transports were changing course to join the impossible battle against enemies that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. Zefkari watched in amazement as human vessels began arriving from across the solar system. They came without question or hesitation, despite having no chance of survival against the Devourer fleet. Transport ships armed themselves with mining lasers while research vessels powered up experimental weapons never meant for combat. The observer had expected these primitive beings to flee toward their home planet or try to negotiate with the ancient enemy. Instead, they were forming battle lines alongside the Defiance like warriors who had fought together for centuries instead of strangers who had never met before. Chief Engineer Ben Cooper worked in engine compartments where radiation levels would kill him in hours while he boosted their reactor output beyond every safety protocol in the technical manuals. Someone had to give their weapons enough power to at least make their deaths meaningful against an enemy that had devoured galaxies. Medic Amy Watson prepared emergency medical stations throughout the ship and trained civilian volunteers to help treat casualties during the coming battle. She knew most wounds would be instantly fatal against weapons designed to sterilize planets. But training gave people something to focus on besides their approaching deaths. The human fleet grew larger as more vessels arrived to join the hopeless fight. Cargo haulers and passenger liners and construction ships took positions in formation with military vessels while their crews prepared to die beside strangers who shared nothing except their species and their refusal to surrender. Patrol cutter commanders who had spent their careers chasing smugglers and pirates now found themselves commanding battle groups against enemies their ancestors had never imagined. They coordinated attack runs and defensive positions with the calm professionalism of officers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Lisa Carter broadcast continuous updates to Earth, telling the home planet what was happening while she coordinated communications between ships whose crews had never worked together before. Everyone understood their role without needing detailed orders because the situation was simple enough for any human to grasp. The Devourer fleet spread across the inner system like infection moving through healthy tissue. Their biomechanical ships pulsed with malevolent hunger while scanning frequencies, searched for population centers and orbital installations to target for maximum destruction. Jake Morrison opened a direct channel to the alien observer whose crystal ship hung motionless between the human fleet and the approaching enemy. His words carried across space with the weight of his entire species behind them and changed everything. The collective thought they knew about primitive civilizations. I do not know your name or your people, but those things out there will not stop with destroying humanity. They will move from system to system and world to world until nothing lives anywhere in this galaxy. Help us fight them or watch them devour everything that exists. Helen Davis finished calculating the tactical situation and transmitted her analysis to every human ship in the formation. They had perhaps 20 minutes before the enemy reached weapons range and 37 vessels to face over 3,000 devourer ships in a battle that would determine the fate of Earth. Zefkari struggled with directives that seemed inadequate for the current situation. Collective protocol forbade interference in conflicts between primitive species and their enemies, but these ancient devourers represented a threat to every living world in the galaxy, including the ethereal homeworlds. The devourer fleet spread across the solar system like a cancer consuming healthy tissue, while their biomechanical vessels pulsed with ancient hunger. Zefkari felt something that advanced beings were not supposed to experience as the observer. Watched enemies that had destroyed the ethereal collective's ancestors preparing to feed once again. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, studying tactical displays that showed impossible odds while his crew prepared their dying ship for battle against creatures that had devoured civilizations before humans learned to make fire. The Defiance shook under the strain of overloaded systems, but every person aboard worked with calm efficiency. The alien observers struggled with protocols that seemed inadequate for facing enemies that threatened every living world in the galaxy. Collective doctrine forbade interference in primitive species conflicts, but the devourers represented extinction for all biological life, including the advanced civilizations that considered themselves beyond such concerns. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Phillips had somehow managed to boost their weapons output to 200% of rated capacity, while bypassing safety systems that would normally shut down the reactor before it could explode. He worked in radiation fields that would kill him slowly, but his hands remained steady on controls that might give humanity a few extra minutes of existence. Communications Officer Lisa Carter coordinated the growing human fleet with the same professional competence she had shown while monitoring routine patrol reports. Mining vessels and research ships and passenger transports took their positions in battle formation while their civilian crews prepared to fight enemies beyond their worst nightmares. Zefkari watched more human vessels arrive and marveled at their behavior under impossible circumstances. These beings showed no signs of panic or attempts to flee despite facing odds that would make advanced civilizations retreat to fortified strongholds. They came to fight knowing they would die and seemed honored by the chance to do so. Navigator Helen Davis transmitted tactical solutions to ship commanders who had never fought space battles before while calculating attack runs for vessels whose weapons were designed for construction work instead of combat. Cargo hauler captains studied her plans with the same attention they once gave to shipping schedules. The human fleet numbered 43 vessels, now including ships that had no business in a military engagement. Hospital ships armed with medical lasers and civilian transports carrying improvised missile launchers took positions alongside patrol cutters whose crews had trained for this kind of battle. Medic Amy Watson organized emergency medical protocols for the entire fleet while training civilian volunteers to treat casualties with supplies that would run out in the first few minutes of combat. Everyone understood the futility of medical preparation for a battle they could not survive, but human nature demanded the attempt. Chief Engineer Ben Cooper crawled through maintenance tunnels that glowed with dangerous radiation while jury-rigging power couplings that could explode at any moment. His dosimeter readings climbed past levels that guaranteed eventual death, but someone had to keep the reactor stable until their weapons could fire at least once. The Devourer bioships moved closer with predatory patience while their scanning beams examined every human vessel like a predator studying prey before feeding. Energy patterns along their hulls pulsed faster as they detected the life signs of millions of humans throughout the inner solar system. Jake Morrison opened communications with the alien observer, whose crystal ship hung between the human fleet and approaching enemy. His words carried desperation, but also something else that made Zefkari examine these creatures with new understanding of what primitive meant in the context of courage versus technology. Your people must have fought these things before and survived, or you would not exist to observe us now. We are asking for help not because we deserve it, but because letting them win means every living world dies after they finish with Earth. Stand with us or watch the galaxy burn. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan ran continuous diagnostics on weapon systems that everyone knew were inadequate for the approaching battle while coordinating targeting solutions with other ships whose combined firepower might damage a single enemy vessel. If they concentrated their attacks perfectly, the alien vessel represented technology that could shift the balance of an impossible battle, but collective protocols valued self-preservation above all other considerations. Engaging the devourers meant risking advanced, ethereal systems falling into enemy hands if the battle was lost. Helen Davis calculated probability matrices that showed human defeat in every scenario except direct intervention by superior alien technology. Her analysis indicated zero chance of survival without help from the crystal ship that floated motionless while ancient enemies approached the inner system. Zefkari observed human behavior and saw something that challenged every assumption about primitive species classification. These beings prepared to sacrifice themselves against impossible odds not for territorial gain or resource acquisition, but simply for the right to continue existing as a species. Engineer Ryan Phillips explained human military doctrine to crew members who had never served in combat roles while showing them how to turn mining equipment into weapons and construction tools into defensive systems. Civilian engineers absorbed tactical knowledge with the same focus they once applied to building orbital habitats. The Devourer fleet began forming attack formations that had destroyed star systems throughout galactic history while their biomechanical ships prepared weapons capable of sterilizing entire planets in minutes. Energy readings climbed toward levels that would overwhelm human shields before their weapons could return fire. Ben Cooper rerouted life support systems to provide additional power for weapons that might fire once before overloading while his radiation poisoning advanced toward lethal levels. Every breath became more difficult, but his work continued because someone had to give humanity a chance to hurt their enemies. Lisa Carter broadcast final messages toward Earth while coordinating attack patterns for ships whose crews had never worked together before the approaching apocalypse. Her voice remained steady as she guided strangers through battle plans that would likely kill everyone involved. Zefkari made a decision that violated every collective protocol and training directive received over millions of years of existence. The crystalline vessel's weapon systems came online, while advanced shielding extended to protect the human fleet from enemy fire that could penetrate any defense Earth technology could provide. For the first time in the observer's existence, logic yielded to something that advanced beings had supposedly evolved beyond. The alien ship prepared to fight alongside primitives whose greatest strength was their absolute refusal to surrender even when facing certain extinction. Space erupted in fire, and light as 43. Human vessels engaged over 3,000 devourer ships in a battle that would determine the fate of every living world in the galaxy. The odds were impossible and the outcome already written in the cold mathematics of superior numbers, but humanity fought with a fury that shattered every assumption about primitive species. Captain Jake Morrison led the charge aboard the Defiance as his damaged warship traded broadsides with biomechanical monsters 3 times its size. The human vessel shook apart under enemy fire while its crew worked at stations that sparked and smoked from overloaded systems pushed far beyond their design limits. Zefkari watched the crystalline vessel's weapons carve through devourer formations, like light cutting through darkness, but even advanced ethereal technology could not overcome such overwhelming numbers. The alien observer had joined this hopeless battle knowing it meant probable death for reasons that defied every logical protocol. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan coordinated targeting solutions for the human fleet while her tactical displays showed friendly contacts disappearing faster than enemy vessels could be destroyed. Mining ships and civilian transports died in brilliant explosions as their crews chose ramming attacks over retreat when their improvised weapons failed. The Devourer bioships moved with predatory grace while firing weapons that turned human vessels into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Their organic hulls pulsed with satisfaction as they fed on the energy released by dying ships and the terror of crews who faced extinction. Communications Officer Lisa Carter guided damaged vessels through coordinated attack runs, while her own ship fell apart around her station. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into space while emergency bulkheads held back the vacuum for a few more precious minutes of operational capability. Chief Engineer Ben Cooper worked in engine compartments that glowed with lethal radiation as he rerouted power from life support systems to weapons that might fire one more time before overloading. His hands moved with steady precision despite radiation sickness that made every motion agony. Navigator Helen Davis plotted suicide runs for ships too damaged to fight effectively while calculating the maximum destruction their deaths could inflict on enemy formations. Her voice remained calm as she guided dying vessels to their final targets with mathematical precision. The human fleet fought with desperate courage that amazed the alien observer, who had studied thousands of species facing extinction. These primitive beings pushed their obsolete technology beyond every safety limit while their crews worked at stations that should have killed them from radiation exposure or system overloads. Medic Amy Watson treated casualties with medical supplies that ran out in the first 10 minutes of combat while the ship's medical bay filled with wounded crew members who refused to abandon their posts. She worked without proper equipment in conditions that would challenge a fully equipped hospital. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Phillips jury-rigged a quantum resonance cascade using their damaged reactor core while enemy fire tore through the hull around his workstation. The resulting explosion would vaporize the Defiance but create a chain reaction that might cripple a significant portion of the Devourer fleet. The battle raged across three-dimensional space as human vessels died in ones and twos, while inflicting damage that should have been impossible given their technological disadvantage. Civilian crews operated military weapon systems with the same competence they had once applied to mining asteroids or hauling cargo. Patrol cutter captains led attack formations against bioships that dwarfed their vessels while coordinating with mining barges whose industrial lasers cut through enemy armor. Research ships used experimental weapons never intended for combat, while passenger liners rammed devourer vessels with their reinforced hulls. Zefkari observed human behavior under extreme stress and saw something that challenged every assumption about what made a species truly dangerous. These beings fought not for conquest or resources, but for the simple right to exist, and their absolute refusal to accept defeat made them more terrifying than any advanced weapon. The crystalline vessel's shields extended over human ships that would have been destroyed instantly by enemy fire, while advanced weapon systems targeted Devourer command vessels with precision beyond human capability. The alien technology made a difference but could not overcome the mathematics of superior numbers. Ben Cooper completed his modifications to the reactor core while radiation levels climbed past lethal thresholds and enemy fire penetrated deeper into the ship's interior. His work would kill everyone aboard the Defiance, but might create enough destruction to justify their sacrifice. Helen Davis coordinated the final attack runs while human vessels formed up for one last charge against the enemy fleet. Her calculations showed exactly how many Devourer ships they could destroy if every remaining human vessel committed to ramming attacks instead of conventional weapons fire. The quantum cascade erupted from the Defiance's reactor core like a miniature star being born in the dark void of space. Energy levels spiked beyond measurement as the chain reaction spread through quantum fields that connected every ship in the immediate area. Lisa Carter broadcast final messages to Earth while guiding the last functional human vessels through attack patterns designed to maximize their destructive potential. Her voice carried across space with words that would be remembered as long as humanity existed. We fought them here so they could not reach our home. Remember what we did today and never let anyone tell? You that humans are not capable of miracles when everything depends on our courage. The cascade reaction tore through the Devourer fleet like wildfire consuming dry grass as ships that had survived millions of years of galactic warfare crumbled into component atoms. Biomechanical hulls that could withstand planetary bombardment dissolved under energies that human science had never imagined possible. Amy Watson worked to save crew members floating in emergency pods. while the battle continued around them with the same dedication she had shown while treating casualties aboard the dying ship. Her medical training meant nothing in the face of injuries caused by exotic weapons, but she tried anyway. Zefkari watched ancient enemies flee from a battlefield for the first time in galactic history as the surviving devourer vessels retreated into hyperspace rather than face more human suicide attacks. The quantum cascade had destroyed over half their fleet and broken their formation completely. The quantum cascade tore through space like the birth cry of a new star as the chain reaction consumed enemy vessels that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. Devourer bioships that had survived the destruction of entire civilizations crumbled into component atoms while their ancient hunger finally met something it could not devour. Zefkari floated among the wreckage of both fleets while processing what had just transpired in the empty void between planets. Less than 12 human vessels remained operational from the original 43, but they had achieved something impossible by destroying over half the enemy force and driving the survivors to retreat. The surviving devourer ships fled into hyperspace rather than continue facing creatures that turned their own deaths into weapons against superior technology. For the first time in recorded galactic history, these ancient predators had abandoned a battlefield because their prey fought back with such ferocity that victory became too costly. Captain Jake Morrison's voice crackled over emergency communications from a damaged escape pod that had ejected from the Defiance before the quantum cascade vaporized his ship. His first words after humanity's greatest victory asked not about glory or recognition, but whether his sacrifice had protected the innocent. Did we win, or are more of them coming back? Are Earth and the colony safe from these things? Lieutenant Kate Sullivan coordinated search and rescue operations from the bridge of a mining vessel whose civilian crew had somehow survived ramming 2 enemy ships during the final attack phase. Her tactical training meant nothing in the aftermath, but her leadership skills helped organize relief efforts for scattered survivors. Communications. Officer Lisa Carter transmitted battle reports toward Earth while coordinating with the few remaining human vessels to search for emergency pods and survivors floating in the debris field. Her equipment was damaged beyond repair, but she improvised communications arrays from salvaged components. The alien observer approached the human survivors with sensors that detected life signs, scattered across thousands of cubic kilometers of wreckage. These primitive beings had shown something the advanced ethereal collective had never possessed during millions of years of peaceful existence among the stars. Chief Engineer Ben Cooper had somehow survived the reactor explosion that destroyed his ship when medic Amy Watson pulled his unconscious body from an emergency pod moments before it would have drifted into the expanding energy field. His radiation exposure guaranteed eventual death, but medical treatment might buy him months instead of hours. Navigator Helen Davis worked from a damaged patrol cutter to coordinate rescue operations with the same calm efficiency she had shown while plotting suicide runs during the height of battle. Her calculations now focused on life support requirements and medical triage. Instead of weapons targeting, Zefkari examined the battlefield wreckage and tried to understand what had made these humans so dangerous that ancient enemies chose retreat over continued engagement. Their technology was primitive and their vessels were inferior, but their absolute refusal to surrender had turned certain defeat into impossible victory. The few surviving human ships moved through the debris field rescuing crew members who had ejected in emergency pods while their vessels died around them. Civilian miners and cargo haulers worked alongside military personnel to save strangers, whose names they had never learned before the battle. Engineer Ryan Phillips transmitted technical data about the quantum cascade to surviving vessels while floating in a medical pod that barely kept him alive. His modifications to the reactor core had created a weapon that human science could never reproduce, but the principles might help defend other worlds. Amy Watson organized medical triage for casualties, whose injuries ranged from radiation sickness to explosive decompression while working with medical supplies salvaged from destroyed ships. Her training covered treating battle wounds, but nothing had prepared her for caring for survivors of exotic energy weapons. The alien observer began composing a new report for the ethereal collective. That would challenge every assumption about primitive species classification. These humans deserved something far beyond Category 4 status because they had demonstrated abilities that advanced civilizations could barely comprehend. Lisa. Carter established communications with Earth and transmitted news of humanity's victory, along with casualty reports that listed over 2,000 crew members missing and presumed dead. Her voice carried exhaustion and grief, but also pride in what her species had accomplished, against impossible odds. Jake Morrison floated in his escape pod while watching rescue vessels approach through the transparent aluminum viewport. His ship was gone and most of his crew were dead, but they had saved Earth and possibly every living world in the galaxy from an enemy that had devoured civilizations. Helen Davis calculated the strategic implications of their victory while coordinating with surviving ship captains to establish patrol routes around the battle site. The devourers might return with reinforcements, or other ancient enemies might investigate the quantum energy signatures. Zefkari realized that standing beside humans during their darkest hour had revealed something terrifying about this species that went far beyond their capacity for violence. The real horror was not their ability to destroy, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat even when facing certain extinction. Ben Cooper transmitted his final engineering reports while radiation sickness advanced toward lethal stages despite medical treatment. His modifications to human reactor technology might help future generations defend themselves, but someone else would have to implement the improvements. The crystalline vessel moved among human survivors, offering medical assistance and technological aid, while Zefkari processed the implications of what these primitive beings had accomplished. They had turned their greatest weakness into their most powerful weapon by refusing to surrender. Kate Sullivan organized the surviving fleet into defensive formations while search and rescue operations continued throughout the debris field. Her tactical analysis showed they lacked enough operational vessels to mount effective patrols, but human determination would have to substitute for adequate numbers. The Ethereal Collective would receive a report recommending immediate alliance protocols with humanity, not because they were peaceful or logical, but because they possessed something far more valuable to galactic civilization. They were hope incarnate, wrapped in flesh and steel, and an unbreakable will to protect everything they loved. Amy Watson worked to save crew members whose injuries should have been fatal, while the few surviving ships established temporary medical facilities for casualties too severe to treat in emergency conditions. Her medical training had never covered treating wounds from weapons that violated several laws of physics. Zefkari understood now that the true horror of humanity lay not in their violence, but in their terrifying refusal to let evil triumph regardless of the cost to themselves. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating creatures who could turn their own deaths into victory.